This incident occurred during my college years one night after a few drinks. I returned home to the small house I shared with two other girls, around 2:30 a.m. We were all dedicated students, though I was probably the least serious among us. When we partied, it wasn't the typical wild college party you'd expect, more like a small get-together with friends. Often, a few people would crash at our place, sleeping on our furniture or even in our beds, depending on the situation. On this particular night, my roommates had invited some people over whom I didn't know. As I entered our house, I noticed one of them had decided to sleep on the couch. From the shadowy figure I saw, I could tell something was off. He had an eerie vibe about him, lying there as if he was putting all his energy into staying perfectly still and rigid. I paused, and suddenly, he jerked his head to face me without moving his limbs, startling me. I could see his wide-open eyes glinting in the dark. Feeling a bit uneasy, I quickly made my way to my bedroom and locked the door. Something about that guy made me nervous, and I wasn't willing to take any chances. I eventually fell asleep around 4:30 a.m. When I woke up, I heard a strange sound at the door, like someone drumming their fingers against the wood, very quietly. I lay still and listened. The sounds grew louder, resembling someone scratching the door with their fingers, and it became clear that this person was using both hands and scratching vigorously, creating an extremely loud and intimidating noise that filled me with fear. I grabbed my cell phone and texted my roommate, too afraid to make a sound. I asked if her friend was using drugs or something because he was banging and scratching at my door, clearly trying to terrify me. When she and my other roommate didn't respond, I decided to call them, despite my fear. I knew something was seriously wrong, and maybe the police needed to be involved. The scratching abruptly stopped. When my roommate finally answered, she sounded wide awake. I told her about the situation and asked her to deal with her friend because he was scaring me. She replied, "What friend?" I was puzzled, and she added, "We didn't have any guys over. Call the police." My adrenaline surged as I urged her to lock her bedroom door quickly. I hadn't heard scratching for a while, and I had no idea where the intruder had gone. Suddenly, I heard loud banging from the other end of the house, where my roommates shared a bedroom. The banging was followed by their terrified screams. It was clear that this person was trying to break down their locked bedroom door. I immediately called 911 and explained the situation. The dispatcher dispatched 2 police cars. While I was on the line with the dispatcher, I noticed that the intruder had slipped his fingers through the small gap between my door and the floor, wiggling them around and making a strange growling sound. I screamed and backed away. When the police arrived, I heard footsteps and the sliding glass door opening and closing, and then the intruder was gone. Unfortunately, the police never caught him. It was later discovered that he had broken in through our side door by tampering with the lock. My bedroom door was covered in large gouges made with a pair of scissors, which he had left behind. What terrifies me most about this ordeal is that I had walked right past him and looked him in the face. In hindsight, he wasn't lying stiff and strange because he was sleeping or on drugs, he was hiding. He likely heard me come in and panicked because he hadn't realized there was another person living there and tried to blend in with the couch in the darkness. I'm 22 years old, and this unsettling incident occurred about 1.5 years ago. It all began when I had just moved into my first apartment. The door to my apartment had a self-locking mechanism when closed. On this particular day, I decided to head to the entrance of the apartment complex to retrieve my mail while engaged in a phone conversation with my boyfriend. Upon returning to my apartment, I sat on the bed, still chatting on the phone and opening my mail. Unfortunately, my phone slipped from my grasp and ended up under the bed. To retrieve it, I had to lie on the floor and stretch underneath. It was during this moment that something caught my attention. To my shock, there was someone under my bed. My eyes widened, and I suppressed the urge to scream. The individual under the bed lay completely motionless, with their back facing me and their head lowered, making it impossible for me to see their face. They seemed unaware of my presence. As a whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind, I quickly picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just going to take a shower and call you back." The bathroom was right next to my bed, so I silently locked the door, turned on the shower, and then swiftly made my escape through the window. Fortunately, my apartment was on the first floor. I immediately called the police and was instructed to wait nearby. I positioned myself across the street, hiding behind a parked car, with a clear view of my open bathroom window and the entrance door to the apartment complex. It was still daylight, as this incident occurred during the summer. I also called my boyfriend, who came to be with me just before the police arrived. I handed over my keys to the officers, and they entered my apartment. Moments later, 2 policemen emerged, holding a thin and weary-looking man. His eyes appeared erratic, but he made no attempt to escape. One of the officers, who had been by my side, providing comfort while they searched my house, informed me that the man had been standing outside my bathroom door, clutching one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to exit. It was later revealed that this individual had tampered with my entry door while I was collecting my mail and had concealed himself under my bed. Shockingly, the man who posed a threat to me turned out to be homeless and was subsequently placed in a mental hospital. In response to this harrowing experience, my boyfriend decided to move in with me the very next day for added security and peace of mind. Approximately 5 years ago, I resided in the downtown area of a major U.S. city. I've always had a penchant for staying up late, often leaving me bored once my roommate, who wasn't a night owl, went to bed. During this time, I would frequently embark on long walks and engage in contemplation. For 4 years, I had a routine of walking alone at night, and I had never encountered a reason to feel afraid. I used to jest with my roommate that even the city's drug dealers were polite. However, everything changed on one evening, just within a few minutes. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning. I found myself strolling near a park patrolled by the police, which was quite a distance from my apartment. It was an unusually quiet night, even for a weeknight, with minimal traffic and hardly anyone on foot. The park, as it usually was, lay deserted. As I turned down a short side street, intending to make my way back to my apartment, I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side, there was a silhouette of a man dancing. It was an odd dance, resembling a waltz, but he concluded each step with a nod and a forward stride. Initially, I assumed he was intoxicated. To give him more space, I moved closer to the road, allowing him the majority of the sidewalk as he approached. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was tall and slender, dressed in an old suit. He continued dancing closer, and I could finally make out his face. His eyes were wide open, gazing wildly at the sky, and his mouth formed an excessively wide, almost cartoonish smile. To avoid any further interaction, I decided to cross the street before he reached me. I diverted my attention away from him as I crossed the deserted road. Upon reaching the other side, I glanced back and was taken aback. He had ceased dancing and was now standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He faced me but continued gazing at the sky, that unnerving smile still on his lips. I was thoroughly unsettled by this, and I resumed walking while keeping my eyes on the man. He didn't move. After I had put some distance between us, I momentarily looked away, focusing on the sidewalk ahead. When I glanced back, I stopped dead in my tracks. He had crossed the street and was crouched down slightly, although the distance and shadows made it challenging to confirm. However, I was convinced he was facing me. I had only taken my eyes off him for a brief 10 seconds or so, yet he had moved quickly. I was so shocked that I stood there, staring at him. He began moving toward me again, taking exaggerated tiptoed steps, resembling a character from a cartoon sneaking up on someone. However, he was moving at an alarming speed. I wish I could say that I ran away, grabbed my pepper spray, or reached for my phone, but I didn't. I remained completely frozen as the smiling man crept closer. He stopped again, this time at a distance of about a car length from me, that eerie smile still on his face, and his gaze fixed on the sky. Eventually, I found my voice and blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the hell do you want?" in an authoritative tone. But what came out was a feeble whimper. Regardless of whether humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it, and I could hear it in my own voice, which only heightened my fear. However, he didn't react to my whimper at all. He remained standing there, smiling, and then, after what felt like an eternity, he turned around very slowly and resumed his dance walk, moving away from me. I didn't want to turn my back on him again, so I watched him until he was nearly out of sight. Then, I realized something horrifying. He wasn't moving away anymore, and he wasn't dancing. I watched in terror as the distant figure of the man grew larger and larger. He was coming back in my direction, and this time, he was running. I ran as well, not stopping until I was on a well-lit road with sparse traffic. I glanced behind me, and he was nowhere to be found. From that moment on, I never went out for another walk in that city. There was something about his face that haunted me. He didn't appear intoxicated or under the influence of drugs. Instead, he seemed completely and utterly insane, and witnessing that was an exceptionally chilling experience. During the mid-80s, my mother worked as a cleaner in Australia. Her job involved cleaning houses in suburban neighborhoods and, occasionally, houses in rural wine regions, as we lived close to both areas. She would often leave her business cards at local shops, which was a successful way for her to attract clients, in addition to referrals and word-of-mouth recommendations. One day, she received a phone call from a woman who sounded to be around 60 years old. The woman asked my mom to clean her old farmhouse. She made several unusual demands. Normally, my mom would meet potential clients in person before accepting new business, but this lady insisted on not meeting my mom. Instead, she instructed my mom to find the keys under the front doormat. My mom agreed to the job mainly because the lady appeared to be quite wealthy and was offering to pay her a substantially higher fee than she would typically expect. On a Monday morning, my mom drove to the house, which already made her feel uneasy due to its location. The house was situated in the middle of a vast and empty property, and the driveway alone gave her an eerie feeling. Upon arriving, my mom found the keys as instructed and began her cleaning. About an hour into the cleaning, she heard the back door shut. This was unsettling because she had been told that no one would be at the house. She immediately felt unsafe and stood frozen in the kitchen. It felt like 3 to 4 minutes, although it could have been much longer. There were no other cars on the property, and she wanted to leave right away. However, she still had 2 bedrooms left to clean. As time passed with no further sounds, she began to doubt her initial fear. She thought that maybe it was nothing or perhaps something had simply fallen, causing the door to shut. She decided to continue and walked down the hallway toward one of the bedrooms. Inside the bedroom, she made a disturbing discovery. Spread all over the bed were black and white photos, and as she got closer, she realized that all of these photos were of her. Some were taken at our family home, while many others were taken at different houses she had cleaned over time. Some of the photos were taken through windows or fences. My mom immediately used the house phone to call the police and then rushed to her car, parked at the end of the driveway. The woman who had hired her was investigated, but she consistently claimed that it was a break-in. Eventually, the police stopped their search, and we decided to move to a new town 4 months later. Every time my mom recounts this story, it sends shivers down my spine. It is a true story, and to this day, my mom suspects that the lady had some involvement in the unsettling incident. However, the motive behind it remains a mystery. Recently, my sister and I revisited a memory during our weekly get-togethers. At the time, we had just relocated to a suburban area, settling into our first house in a rather decent yet isolated part of town. She was 12 years old, and I was 7. Our mom allowed us to take our white German Shepherd for a walk. I can vividly recall the setting sun casting its warm glow over the desert landscape. Despite the remote location, we weren't particularly concerned. It was a delightful feeling to walk unsupervised on the streets. We cherished the freedom and took our time, allowing our dog, Kodak, to explore and investigate everything around us. After letting Kodak off the leash, we watched with joy as he eagerly chased after a rabbit. In our excitement, we didn't notice the car pulling up nearby, nor did we hear the approach of a large man sneaking up behind us. Kodak had ventured some distance away when suddenly, he turned back to look at us. In an instant, he darted back towards us, moving so swiftly it seemed like his paws barely touched the ground. He raced past our outstretched arms and pounced on the man who had crept up behind us. Kodak, with his substantial size and sharp teeth, began fiercely attacking the man's arm. It was a chaotic scene, with Kodak vigorously defending us. Eventually, the man managed to disengage Kodak from his arm, and our faithful dog then positioned himself between us and the man. Unaware of the danger we had been in, we apologized to the stranger. He offered a shaky smile and told us that we were good kids before stumbling back to his car. I vaguely remember a length of rope on the ground, which I now assume he had been carrying. As we looked at Kodak, he continued to growl protectively until we safely reached home. My sister whispered to me, "Don't tell Mom, or they'll put Kodak down for biting someone." It was a naive perspective, as we believed we were safeguarding our beloved pet. In reality, Kodak had potentially saved one or both of us from a dreadful fate. Much later, I learned that our hometown was an area that attracted sexual predators and violent criminals. Many neighboring communities had enacted legislation to prevent them from residing within their borders, so they ended up in our town. This revelation shed light on why our house had been so affordably priced.